The dawn of a new chapter in our tale begins not with firelight, but with migration. Somewhere on the edges of Africa's northern coasts, bands of Homo sapiens rise with the sun, their belongings few, their hopes many. They are restless, driven by forces they cannot name: hunger, drought, curiosity, perhaps even an ancestral whisper telling them to move beyond horizons they have never seen. For thousands of years, Africa had been cradle, fortress, and teacher. Here, humanity learned to walk upright, to harness flame, to sharpen stone, to paint meaning into the cave walls of existence. But the earth is not constant. Climate shifts bite deep into savanna and forest alike. Rivers that once sang with abundance shrivel into silence. Herds migrate farther, waterholes vanish, and the fragile balance of survival tilts dangerously. It is in this crucible that the decision, or necessity, to leave arises. Across the Red Sea, narrow at its shallowest crossings, lies Arabia. Beyond Arabia, the vast unknown. To step forward means risk. To stay behind means famine. And so they gather driftwood, bundle reeds, test rafts against the current. The first crossings are perilous, each wave threatening to drag the fragile craft beneath. Yet desperation has always been the midwife of innovation. And so, humanity sails. This exodus is not a march of millions. It begins with handfuls, with clans numbering scarcely more than 100 souls. A child clings to her mother's shoulder, a hunter steadies his trembling raft, an elder whispers chants to ward off the sea's anger. Each life seems small, but in them rests the fate of continents. Once on new shores, the world opens like a vast, unread manuscript. Arabia's coasts shimmer under relentless sun. Its deserts sprawl wide and merciless. Yet even here, life flickers. Hidden springs, shaded oases, gazelle herds tracing invisible paths across the dunes. Step by step, these wanderers adapt. They learn which plants can be eaten, which roots yield water, which stars lead them to safety. Generations pass, and with them, footsteps spread. Eastward, some follow river valleys into Persia, others north into the Levant. With each migration, they encounter new landscapes and new challenges. Mountains wrapped in snow, forests dense and whispering, grasslands teeming with strange beasts. To survive, they refine old skills and invent new ones. Spears become sharper, tools more versatile, strategies more coordinated. But migration is not a solitary act. Across these same lands dwell others, Neanderthals, masters of Europe and Western Asia. For hundreds of thousands of years, they have thrived in the cold and rugged terrain, shaping stone into perfect edges, hunting in disciplined bands, raising children beneath rocky shelters. Their roots here run deep. When Homo sapiens arrive, they do not step into emptiness. They step into territory already claimed. This is the beginning of a long shadow, cast across the continent. Two species, so close in form yet divided by invisible boundaries of culture, mind, and destiny. For now, they may not always meet, for the world is wide. But every step Homo sapiens take carries them closer to the Neanderthal heartlands, closer to encounters that will shape the future. At the close of this first passage, we stand on a threshold again. Humanity has left its cradle. The seas are behind them, the vast continents ahead. And in the distance, though unseen, the Neanderthals wait, guardians of the lands to which sapiens now march. The stage is set, the players moving ever closer. What began as migration will soon become contact. And contact will breed questions no fire can answer easily. Will they fight? Will they trade? Will they learn? Or will one extinguish the other's flame? The years unfold into centuries, and centuries into millennia. What begins as fragile migration becomes steady expansion. The Homo sapiens, once bound to narrow coasts, now spread inland into valleys and mountain passes, chasing the great herds that sustain them. Step by step, their footprints press deeper into Eurasia, a continent vast and untamed. This is a world still ruled by ice and beast. Towering mammoths lumber across frozen plains, their tusks gleaming like carved ivory under the pale sun. Woolly rhinoceroses scrape through snow to uncover buried grasses. Caves echo with the roars of lions larger and fiercer than any to come in later ages. And above it all, the bitter cold dictates the rhythm of survival, shaping every choice, every path. To enter this land is no small feat. For sapiens, the cold is a relentless enemy. Their bodies are leaner than those of Neanderthals, less adapted to conserve heat. Their children shiver in the night, and hunters must work tirelessly to keep bellies full. But where their bodies falter, their minds provide a counterweight. With skins stitched into cloaks, with shelters of wood and bone, with fire carefully tended through the worst of storms, they bend survival into possibility. And as they adapt, their culture deepens. Words, still crude but growing, carry not only commands but memories. Elders tell of hunts past, of rivers crossed, of animals encountered. Stories become maps, maps become guides, guides become survival. Around firelight, imagination blossoms. Hunters envision prey before the chase. Mothers soothe children with rhythmic tales. Shamans trace symbols in the dirt, testing the boundaries of meaning. But not all discoveries come from within. At times, their wandering leads them to places already marked by presence. The hearth remains of strangers, the bones of hunted beasts carved with unfamiliar precision, the smell of smoke drifting on the wind. These are the signs of the Neanderthals. To sapiens, these strangers are both kin and enigma. Their footprints are wider, their tools heavier, their shelters sturdier. Where sapiens are restless, Neanderthals seem rooted. To see the traces of their lives is to feel a ghostly competition, though direct encounters are still rare. And yet, with every new valley entered, the chance of meeting face-to-face grows stronger. Among sapiens' bands, questions stir. Who are these others who shape stone like we do? Are they gods of the mountains, or hunters like ourselves? Can we share the same herds, the same rivers, the same fire? No answers come quickly, but curiosity itself marks a divide. For while Neanderthals perfect the known, sapiens itch for the unknown. It is this difference, subtle yet immense, that will begin to tip the scales of history. Not strength, not even immediate survival, but the hunger for what lies just beyond. A hunger that makes them risk the next ridge, the next river, the next encounter. At the edge of forests where Neanderthal children once played, sapiens now arrive. In caves where Neanderthal bands sheltered, sapiens' fires begin to glow. At first, these are echoes in passing, a rhythm of presence and absence. But as generations turn, the distances shrink, the overlaps deepen, and the question of coexistence sharpens into the question of dominance. The continent, vast as it is, can no longer keep them apart forever. Two species, so alike yet so divided, are now drawn toward the same landscapes, the same resources, the same future. And in that narrowing distance, the first true clashes and the first fragile bonds await. The wind howls across a mountain pass, driving flurries of snow between jagged cliffs. A small band of Homo sapiens trudges forward, their fur cloaks pulled tight, their spears clutched against the bitter cold. Their journey has taken weeks, across valleys where rivers sleep beneath ice, through forests where the silence of winter swallows every sound. They march not for conquest, but for survival, following the fading trail of reindeer herds that move ever northward. But as they crest the ridge, they see something unexpected. Smoke. Thin, steady, curling into the sky from a sheltered hollow below. It is not the wildfire of a lightning strike, nor the scattered embers of a dying blaze. This is fire tended, fire owned, and where there is fire, there is life. The hunters pause, whispering among themselves. Curiosity wrestles with fear. For generations they have seen only traces: stone flakes, bones cracked for marrow, footprints hardened in mud. But now the source of those signs lies before them, hidden in the hollow. With cautious steps, they descend. At the base of the slope, under the overhang of rock, a group of Neanderthals tends their camp. Broad-shouldered, barrel-chested, their movements are deliberate, their presence commanding. A woman kneels to sharpen a flint blade against stone. A man strips sinew from a carcass, binding it for tools. Children sit close to the fire, their faces red with warmth. They do not look up at first, but when they do, their eyes meet the stranger's. The silence is instant, thick as stone. Both groups freeze, spears and tools half raised, fire crackling between them. In that moment, the world holds its breath. Two species, cousins separated by hundreds of thousands of years, now stand face to face. The differences are clear. Neanderthals, shorter but immensely powerful, their brows heavy, their jaws strong, seem like guardians of the land itself. The sapiens, taller, leaner, their faces more open, their eyes restless with thought, seem like travelers from another world. Yet beneath the surface, the similarities are undeniable. Both hold spears. Both huddle against the cold. Both guard their children with the same instinctive vigilance. For a heartbeat, violence threatens. A Neanderthal hunter grips his spear tighter, nostrils flaring. A sapien's youth shifts nervously, raising his weapon in answer. But then, an elder among the Neanderthals, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes deep with memory, lowers his weapon first. He grunts, gestures with an open hand, the universal sign of offering peace. The sapiens hesitate, but one among them, a woman with a child on her hip, steps forward. She kneels, presses a bundle of dried meat to the ground, and retreats. A gift, simple and wordless. The Neanderthals stare, uncertain. Finally, the elder steps forward, picks up the meat, and in return sets down a carved flint, sharp-edged and gleaming. The exchange is made. It is a fragile beginning, more instinct than intention. Yet, in that moment, a bridge forms. For the first time, two species do not simply pass each other's traces in silence. They meet, they exchange, they recognize. Night falls. The sapiens retreat to their own camp, a short distance away. The Neanderthals remain in theirs, but the fires of both camps glow through the darkness, twin signals across the snowbound valley. And though they remain apart, something new lingers in the air. The awareness that they are not alone, that survival now means reckoning with the presence of another who is almost human, yet not. The future of this fragile bond is uncertain. Cooperation, competition, or conflict, all are possible. What is certain is this: the first meeting will not be the last. Winter loosens its grip slowly, but even as spring's thaw brings green back to the valleys, life remains a razor's edge. The same rivers that provide water also draw predators. The same herds that sustain both Neanderthals and sapiens cannot multiply fast enough to feed two species hunting them at once. For a time, there is space enough, prey enough, distance enough. But slowly, inevitably, the strain begins to show. In one valley, Neanderthals and sapiens both track the same herd of reindeer. The animals move in cautious clusters, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at the scent of pursuit. On one ridge, Neanderthals prepare an ambush. Heavy spears, muscle coiled, the knowledge of terrain passed down over generations. On the opposite ridge, sapiens study the same herd, but instead of brute ambush, they weave a plan of endurance. Where Neanderthals rely on raw strength, sapiens exploit patience, chasing prey until exhaustion breaks it down. The clash is not immediate, but it is unavoidable. One band's hunt disrupts the others. Reindeer scatter, spears miss, and shouts echo across the plain. At first, it is anger, guttural cries from the Neanderthals, sharp, frantic calls from the sapiens. Spears are raised, but blows are not yet struck. Neither side dares risk outright slaughter, for both know the cost of injury in this merciless world. And so they retreat, each carrying away little, each eyeing the other with suspicion that will not fade. Such moments multiply. A cave discovered by sapiens turns out to hold Neanderthal marks on its walls. A Neanderthal trap for wild horses is found emptied by strangers who arrived first. Watering holes become crowded, berries stripped clean before the slower gatherers arrive. Survival, once harsh but predictable, now grows unpredictable. Another species is no longer a distant rumor. It is a daily competitor. Within sapiens bands, whispers grow. Some say these Neanderthals are too dangerous, too strong, and should be avoided. Others insist they are clumsy, too bound to routine, unable to adapt and thus exploitable. Among Neanderthals, the elders warn of these newcomers. Too many, too strange, too clever with their tricks. Children are told to stay close, to keep watch, to beware of the fire-eyed people who wander endlessly. And yet, curiosity lingers alongside hostility. A sapiens woman remembers the elder who once exchanged gifts and wonders if such exchanges could be repeated. A Neanderthal youth recalls the strange songs drifting from the stranger's camp, rhythms unlike anything his people know, and he listens with fascination even as his father scolds him. But survival sharpens edges. The land is not generous enough to nurture endless curiosity. When hunger gnaws, when storms break shelters, when prey runs thin, trust is the first casualty. The tension builds like storm clouds. Bands grow more cautious, more territorial. Spears are sharpened, stones hoarded, scouts sent farther afield. Encounters once marked by wary distance now end in skirmishes. Brief, brutal, and inconclusive. A wounded hunter limps home. A missing child sparks fear. A campfire seen on the horizon triggers alarm. Two species, bound by common ancestry yet divided by fate, now orbit each other in uneasy circles. Not enemies sworn, not allies chosen, but rivals in the oldest contest of all, the contest to endure. And in this growing rivalry, the balance of the future begins to shift. The earth remembers the first blood spilled between kin. It does not matter who struck first, whether it was Neanderthal fury or sapiens desperation. What matters is that survival, once strained, tips into violence. The moment begins small. A hunting party of sapiens drives a herd of wild horses toward a ravine, using shouts, fire, and coordinated movement to steer the panicked animals. For hours, the chase continues, sweat freezing on their brows, lungs burning with effort. The trap nears its end when the horses stumble into a narrow pass, only to find a Neanderthal band waiting. The Neanderthals had laid their own trap days before, carefully studied the herd's patterns, and chosen this place as their kill ground. They rise from the rocks with a thunder of voices, spears poised, muscles straining. The horses plunge between two species, and chaos erupts. What should have been prey becomes battle. A sapien spear finds not horseflesh but a Neanderthal's arm. A stone hurled by Neanderthal hands cracks against a sapien's skull. Shouts turn into roars, coordination into frenzy. The herd scatters, forgotten. In its place, the cousins fall upon one another with rage sharpened by hunger. The clash is brief, brutal, and costly. Neanderthals, stronger in close combat, hurl their enemies back with crushing blows. But sapiens, nimble and desperate, strike quick and retreat, bleeding but alive. When the dust settles, bodies lie broken on the ground. Blood seeps into the snow, steaming in the cold. The silence afterward is heavier than any storm. That night, around separate fires, grief mingles with fury. For the sapiens, the memory of their fallen sharpens into anger. A vow whispered that the Neanderthals will pay. For the Neanderthals, the wound of intrusion deepens. These wanderers are no longer a nuisance. They are a threat to be repelled, hunted, destroyed if need be. And so the cycle begins. One skirmish births another. A raid at a watering hole leaves a Neanderthal child missing. A sapiens camp is found burned, their food stolen, their hunters slain. Ambush answers ambush. Retaliation answers raid. The two fires that once glowed apart in the night now glare across the valleys, no longer beacons but warnings. Yet in the bloodshed, patterns emerge. Sapiens, though weaker in single combat, use cunning. They strike at dawn when foes sleep, they lure enemies into traps, they adapt faster than their rivals can predict. Neanderthals, though unmatched in strength and ferocity, fight as they always have, close, direct, unyielding. Their blows are mighty, but their strategies are rigid, leaving them vulnerable to the restless ingenuity of their cousins. The earth itself seems to shudder at this conflict. The forests fall eerily quiet when blood has been spilled. The rivers run red after battle. Even predators keep their distance from the places where cousins kill cousins. For in this clash, something deeper than survival is at stake, the very question of which branch of humanity will inherit the future. And though neither side knows it yet, the outcome of these first wars will echo for tens of thousands of years. The morning after the storm was cold, damp, and heavy with silence. Smoke still curled in thin gray threads from the remains of their burned-out torches. Without fire, the cave felt hollow, like a body without its heartbeat. Taro's breath fogged in the morning air. He held his little brother Kiva close, rubbing his arms to keep the child warm. "We cannot stay without fire," he whispered to Mira, who crouched beside him, gnawing on a piece of raw root. Mira nodded. "The storm killed it. We must take it back from the world." Their people had always feared the loss of fire more than hunger. Without its light, predators prowled too close. Without its heat, sickness crept into the bones. And without its spirit, hope withered. That morning, Taro, Mira, and old Raka left the cave. They carried nothing but sharpened sticks and the memory of how fire once burned. The ash plains. They crossed the soaked valley and came upon a strange land, a field of blackened trees, their trunks charred and split open. Lightning had struck here during the storm. Smoke still drifted lazily from the ground, and the air stank of burned wood. "This is where fire was born last night," Mira whispered. Taro knelt beside a smoldering log. He cupped his hands, blowing softly, trying to coax a spark back to life. Ash puffed into his face. His eyes stung, but no flame came. Old Raka pointed to a cluster of glowing embers hidden deep inside a fallen tree. "There," he rasped. "Fire sleeps. We must wake it." Using bark, moss, and dry reeds, they carefully gathered the embers. Taro's hands trembled. One mistake, and the glowing life would die. He shielded it against the wind with his body, breathing on it gently, whispering like he was coaxing a child. When the first tongue of orange flame licked up from the moss, Mira gasped. Kiva clapped his small hands from the cave entrance where he watched. They had taken fire back from the storm. The beast in the shadows. But survival was never so simple. The smell of smoke carried far, and far in the forest, a predator stirred. As Taro and Mira hurried back toward the cave, clutching their newborn flame, the underbrush shifted. A striped shadow slinked low, golden eyes fixed on them, a saber-toothed cat, drawn by the promise of warmth and weakness. Taro froze, his body rigid. The flame sputtered in his hands. "Do not run," he whispered. His voice was thin, almost broken. The cat crept closer, its paws soundless, its teeth glinting like curved knives in the pale sun. Old Raka lifted his stick, voice steady. "The fire must live, even if we die." Mira grabbed another branch, thrust it into the small flame, and it flared to life. She swung it high, the fire roaring against the gray sky. The beast snarled, pacing, uncertain of this living, biting light. The air between them stretched thin. man and beast, fire and fang. Finally, the cat turned, slipping back into the woods with a low growl. The fire had won. The return of light. Back inside the cave, they fed the flame carefully, building it into a small but steady fire. The shadows retreated, warmth seeped into their skins, and their people sighed in relief. For the first time in days, they laughed. Quiet, shaky laughter, but real. Fire was not just survival. It was strength. It was memory. It was a promise that even in a world of storms, beasts, and hunger, they could endure. Taro stared into the flames, the reflection dancing in his eyes. "The world tried to take it from us," he whispered, "but we took it back." The clan huddled together around the fire that night as the wind howled outside. For a brief moment, their fragile place in the brutal world felt secure. But far beyond the valley, smoke carried into the mountains, where other eyes watched, other tribes stirred, and new challenges awaited. Chapter 3: The Edge of Survival. In the ancient landscapes of Ice Age Europe, survival was not guaranteed. Every step taken, every decision made, was a gamble against hunger, cold, and the dangers that lurked beyond the firelight. For both Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, life was lived on the edge. This was not a world of comfort, but of constant struggle, where the smallest advantage could mean the difference between life and extinction. For the Neanderthals, the environment was familiar yet unforgiving. They had adapted to its challenges for hundreds of thousands of years. Their powerful builds, broad noses, and stocky frames were designed to withstand the punishing cold, to conserve heat as the wind howled across icy plains. They were skilled hunters, masters of ambush, and intimately tied to the rhythms of the land. When mammoths moved across the steppe or bison grazed in valleys, the Neanderthals followed, relying on strength and knowledge passed through countless generations. Yet survival was not just about power. It was about adaptability. And this is where Homo sapiens began to show their edge. Though less robust than their Neanderthal cousins, they compensated with innovation. Where Neanderthals carried heavy thrusting spears, Homo sapiens carved lighter projectiles that could be launched from a distance. Where Neanderthals relied heavily on hunting large prey, sapiens diversified, fishing rivers, trapping small game, and gathering roots, seeds, and berries that dotted the landscape. The contrast between these two ways of life created a fragile tension. Neither species lived in complete isolation anymore. By this time, their territories overlapped, and resources were shared, or contested. A valley that provided enough for one group could not always sustain two. A cave that offered shelter from biting winds might only hold one fire. As the glaciers shifted and forests opened, encounters grew more frequent, and each encounter forced choices that carried enormous consequences. Imagine the weight of those decisions. A band of Neanderthals watching smoke rise from a nearby ridge, realizing that another group, smaller, quicker, unfamiliar, was gathering wood where they themselves had once camped. A family of sapiens crossing a river, only to find footprints larger than their own pressed deep into the mud. Each discovery carried questions that could not easily be answered. Should they flee? Should they fight? Or should they try to coexist? These moments defined the edge of survival. They were not always violent. There may have been exchanges of tools, of knowledge, perhaps even of people. But beneath any fleeting cooperation lay a deeper truth. Two species, alike yet different, could not forever share the same shrinking world without consequence. The survival of one would inevitably press against the survival of the other. And so, the story of this chapter unfolds not in great battles or sudden catastrophes, but in the slow accumulation of pressures. Food, climate, competition, and the silent march of time. All of these forces conspired to shape the fates of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. The stage was set for a struggle that was less about brute force and more about resilience, ingenuity, and the ability to adapt when the rules of survival changed. This was the razor's edge on which humanity itself was forged. The Ice Age world offered little forgiveness for mistakes. For Neanderthals and Homo sapiens alike, every choice rippled outward, shaping not only their own survival, but the endurance of their people. To understand this fragile balance, we must imagine the daily grind of existence. A Neanderthal hunting party rises before dawn, their heavy frames wrapped in hides, stone-tipped spears carried with practiced ease. They know the paths of the reindeer herds, the scent of the wind, the way shadows fall across valleys where prey might move. Hunting was not sport, it was survival. A failed hunt meant empty bellies, wasted energy, and the risk of frostbite in the bitter cold. Across the same valley, perhaps only a few miles away, a small group of Homo sapiens emerges from their camp. They carry lighter weapons, projectile points carved with care, slung in bundles across their shoulders. They, too, follow the reindeer, but they also notice the rabbit trails etched into the snow, the frozen reeds by the river that can be gathered for kindling, the berries still clinging to withered bushes. Their survival strategy is broader, more flexible, spreading risk across many sources. The competition was not always face-to-face, but it was constant. When Neanderthals drove herds into natural traps, sapiens might scavenge from the leftovers. When sapiens fished a river bend, Neanderthals might find fewer animals coming to drink. Every overlap carved away at the resources available, inch by inch, season by season. But the struggle wasn't just against each other, it was against the climate itself. The Ice Age was unstable, swinging between harsh cold spells and fleeting warm periods. Forests would expand, then retreat. Rivers froze, then swelled with glacial melt. To survive these shifts required more than strength. It demanded foresight. Neanderthals, tied closely to large game hunting, were vulnerable when prey dwindled. Homo sapiens, with their more varied strategies, could bend without breaking. Still, survival was not just about food or tools, it was about community. Neanderthals lived in tightly bonded groups, often small in number. Their kin networks were strong but limited. Homo sapiens, by contrast, seemed to weave broader webs of connection. Evidence suggests they shared across groups, trading tools, ornaments, and ideas over distances Neanderthals rarely spanned. This wider network provided not only material goods but information, the knowledge of where herds were moving, when seasons would shift, and what dangers lay ahead. The fragile balance was clear. Neanderthals had the strength of tradition, deep familiarity with their homeland, and bodies sculpted by millennia for endurance. Homo sapiens carried the gift of adaptability, broader diets, lighter tools, and far-reaching alliances. For tens of thousands of years, this balance held. Two species walked the same lands, drank from the same rivers, hunted the same game. But beneath the surface, the weight of change was pressing harder. The glaciers advanced, prey thinned, and populations shifted. The scales tipped slowly, imperceptibly, toward a future where only one would endure. This was not yet the moment of disappearance, but it was the beginning of inevitability. The fragile balance of coexistence was stretched thin, and it would not hold forever. The Ice Age world was vast, but for its human inhabitants it often felt small. Valleys, rivers, and mountain passes became lifelines, bottlenecks through which herds traveled and bands of hunters followed. These were the crossroads where Neanderthals and Homo sapiens most often collided. Picture a river crossing during spring thaw. A band of Neanderthals, sturdy and deliberate, arrives first. They set camp, lighting fires with sparks struck from flint, preparing to hunt the bison that graze nearby. The land feels secure, familiar paths worn by their ancestors for countless generations. Yet, the very next day, smoke rises on the opposite bank. Another group arrives, their figures leaner, their movements quicker. Homo sapiens, strangers but not unknown. Both groups watch the other with wary eyes across the water. Encounters like these were not always violent. Sometimes they ended with nothing more than a quiet retreat, one band moving on to avoid conflict, the other holding its ground. But tension lingered, unspoken yet undeniable. A river might feed both camps for a time, but winter would come again, and with it the sharp edge of scarcity. Coexistence was possible, but it was brittle. Archaeological evidence suggests moments of contact that went beyond suspicion. Tools crafted in one tradition have been found in the settlements of the other. Decorative shells drilled in ways typical of sapiens appear in areas long held by Neanderthals. And in the bones themselves, whispers of interbreeding reveal a truth more complex than simple rivalry. For in every human alive today, fragments of Neanderthal DNA remain, a genetic echo of encounters that blurred the lines between us and them. But such exchanges were fleeting, fragile bridges across a growing divide. For every tool traded, there may have been a conflict left unrecorded, a hunt disrupted, a shelter contested, a fire extinguished in the night by strangers who claimed the cave as their own. These were not battles in the grand sense, but small confrontations, subtle acts that, multiplied across centuries, determined who stayed and who vanished. The psychological impact of these encounters must have been profound. Neanderthals, who had known only their kind for millennia, suddenly faced a mirror image. Creatures that looked familiar yet spoke with strange tongues, moved with unfamiliar rhythms, and carried objects shaped in ways never seen before. To see one's reflection in another species may have been both unsettling and threatening. For Homo sapiens, the Neanderthals represented both danger and opportunity. They were rivals for food, but also sources of knowledge. To watch how they stalked game, how they weathered storms, how they read the land, these were lessons carved into survival. Even hostility could teach. Thus, when worlds collided, the result was not a single story of war or peace, but a spectrum of outcomes. Moments of connection balanced against moments of fear, shared fires contrasted with stolen shelters, bonds of blood interwoven with scars of conflict. In these encounters, humanity as we know it was being shaped, not just in bodies, but in minds, through the constant confrontation with the other, for it is in these collisions that cultures harden, strategies sharpen, and the path toward dominance begins to take form. Competition was the heartbeat of Ice Age existence, not only between predator and prey, but between species who vied for the same lifelines. For Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, this competition was often invisible at first, a dwindling of resources, a silence where herds once thundered, an emptiness in the forests where berries had grown. Yet each absence was felt, each loss carried weight. For the Neanderthals, large-game hunting was central to survival. They had perfected strategies for generations, driving mammoths into pits, ambushing aurochs in narrow valleys, closing in with thrusting spears. But these hunts demanded cooperation, timing, and above all, risk. Injuries were common, sometimes fatal. A broken leg or crushed rib could doom not only a hunter, but his entire band, who relied on his strength. Homo sapiens approached the same challenge differently. Their tools, lighter, more flexible, allowed them to wound prey from a distance, reducing the danger of close contact. They built traps, wove nets, and devised methods of persistence hunting, chasing animals for hours until exhaustion claimed them. In doing so, they minimized risk while broadening reward. The difference was subtle but decisive. Neanderthals poured energy into fewer, larger hunts. Homo sapiens spread their bets across many smaller gains. When the climate shifted and herds became unpredictable, Neanderthal dependence on massive animals turned into a liability. Sapiens, with their wider strategies, adapted with relative ease. But competition was not limited to food. Shelter was equally contested. Caves provided warmth, protection, and stability, a precious advantage in freezing winters. Archaeological records show layers of habitation in some caves, One era marked by Neanderthal fires, the next by sapiens hearths. The two groups did not always meet directly, but the evidence suggests replacement. One group left and another entered, leaving only ash and bone behind. The psychological toll of this slow replacement must have been immense. For Neanderthals, who had held dominance over Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, the creeping presence of sapiens was not just competition, but intrusion. Their landscapes, once familiar and secure, were no longer theirs alone. Every new footprint, every discarded tool left by strangers chipped away at a sense of belonging. For Homo sapiens, the cost of competition was different. Their strategy demanded mobility and cooperation between groups. They pushed further into Neanderthal lands, risking encounters but also creating opportunities. With each new shelter claimed, each herd hunted, they expanded their reach. But expansion carried danger. Every confrontation risked lives, every campfire revealed their presence to rivals who might not hesitate to attack. The cost of competition, therefore, was borne by both. Yet it was uneven. For Neanderthals, whose numbers were smaller and whose reliance was narrower, each loss carried greater weight. For sapiens, broader networks softened the blow, spreading risk across a wider web of kin and allies. Over centuries, this imbalance accumulated like snow upon stone, each flake light, but together enough to reshape the landscape. Survival was not simply about strength. It was about flexibility, and in this measure the scales were tilting. 40,000 years ago, silence began to spread across Eurasia. One by one, valleys that once echoed with Neanderthal voices grew still. For nearly 500,000 years, they had endured ice, predators, and famine. Yet in the span of only a few thousand years, their world unraveled. Climate was their first great enemy. A deep freeze gripped Europe, followed by sudden warming. Forests thinned, rivers shrank, herds migrated. Survival demanded rapid adaptation, an agility in thought and cooperation that Neanderthals, though resourceful, could not always match. But climate alone did not seal their fate. From the east and south, Homo sapiens advanced in growing numbers. With new tools, stronger social bonds, and long-distance trade, they flourished where Neanderthals faltered. Some encounters were peaceful, knowledge exchanged, families joined, but others turned violent. Outnumbered and increasingly isolated, Neanderthals disappeared not in one cataclysm, but through gradual erosion, absorbed into the swelling tide of our species. Narrator, somber, reflective. Their disappearance was not merely an ending, but a transformation. For in our DNA, fragments of them endure. We carry their legacy within us, traces of a people who once walked beside us at the dawn of humanity, and who, in a profound way, remain part of who we are. Though the last Neanderthal vanished more than 30 millennia ago, their story did not end with their extinction. It lives on, written in our blood and bone. Genetic evidence tells us that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. In fact, most people alive today outside of Africa carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. These fragments are not relics. They shape our very biology. Immunity to disease, skin pigmentation, even the way our bodies respond to cold, each may hold echoes of Neanderthal inheritance. But their legacy is not only biological. Their memory has become a mirror for how we define ourselves. Once caricatured as brutish and dim, Neanderthals are now recognized as intelligent, resilient, and creative. They survived in some of the harshest environments on Earth, raised children with care, honored their dead, and adapted for hundreds of thousands of years. In truth, they were not failures of evolution. They were partners in our shared human story, contributors to our success, and reminders of how fragile survival can be. Narrator, with quiet gravity. The fall of the Neanderthals was not simply their loss, it was humanity's inheritance. Without them, we would not be who we are today. Their voices are silent, but their legacy endures within us, whispering through time that we were never alone in the dawn of our becoming.